Hello and welcome to the Little Nut Chronicles. Today I'd like to tell you a story. The story is about a sorcerer and two monkeys. And as it goes, somewhere in the Caribbean on an island there was a resort, and on this resort there was a cage, and in the cage there were two monkeys. Now the monkeys were there for the guests' amusement, and every day passers-by would stop by the cage, take photos of the monkey and enjoy the antics that they like to put on, like running around the cage hollering, and the big monkey would go so far as to even put his hand outside the cage and try and pick the lock. This of course was all spurred on by the enthusiasm of the crowd. Not only that, but being that the resort was in a very tropical place in the Caribbean, there were a lot of forests around the resort as well. And in the distance you could hear the cries to freedom that the monkeys' brethren were screaming at the top of their lungs from the treetops. Of course this drove the two monkeys in the cage even more wild, much to the amusement of the passers-by. So one day, a wise and powerful sorcerer stopped by the Caribbean. He was taking a break from his world adventures, and he decided to stay in this particular resort. And so one day after breakfast, as he was taking a stroll and sipping on his coffee, he noticed all this commotion going around this cage, and he was curious to see what was going on. As he approached the cage, he saw the two monkeys carrying on with their usual antics, their usual tricks, trying to pick the lock, trying to set themselves free, and of course much to the amusement of the crowd who was spurring them on and taking photos. And so it was the sorcerer made a decision. He decided the next day, very early in the morning, before anyone else was up, he was going to unlock the cage and set the monkeys free, because that's what sorcerers do. And so it was the next morning, very early, before the sun had even come up, the sorcerer got up and went towards the cage, and casually just sort of strolled around for a little while, looking about to see if there was anyone in the area. When he was sure that the coast was clear, he unlocked the cage and opened the door and stood back to see what happened. At first the monkeys were very afraid. In fact, the small monkey was so afraid it went and hid in the corner of the cage. The big monkey, feeling a bit more daring, a bit more adventurous, came forward and stuck his head out of the cage, had a look about to see what the strange man was making possible for him. A few minutes passed, and the big monkey finally plucked up the courage to come all the way out of the cage. And as he did so, he went and he stood on the top of the cage, and you could see his ears plucked up as he heard the cries of the monkeys in the forest, calling him to freedom. It was at that moment that the groundkeeper of the resort came around and saw the monkey's cage open. He noticed that the big monkey was on top of the cage as well and started screaming at the top of his lungs, "Get back in the cage, you stupid monkey!" At that point, the monkey did something that the sorcerer didn't quite expect. Instead of taking this once-in-a-lifetime chance and fleeing into the forests, the monkey quickly ran back into the cage, even went as far as to close the door behind him. And so the next morning, the sorcerer again was taking a stroll around the grounds, and he went past the cage again, and to his surprise he saw the two monkeys up to their usual antics, running around and amusing the crowd. The big monkey was doing his usual trick of sticking his hand through the cage and trying to pick the lock to set himself free. The crowd of course was enjoying it. However, when the monkeys saw the sorcerer walking by, they stopped mucking about and kind of cowered in shame in the one corner of their cage, because the sorcerer, you see, he had called their bluff. So how many times is it that people have opened the cage door for you and you have not taken the opportunity to go through, or you have? That, my friends, is the story of the sorcerer and the two monkeys. Thanks for stopping by.